So today we're diving into the absolute high-stakes world of global logistics. When we think about sustainability, we almost always picture exhaust fumes, giant warehouses, or maybe the fuel efficiency of some massive cargo plane. But actually, the truth is that the invisible structures dictating our environmental future, they aren't out there on the highway or out on the ocean. They're actually hidden away in the boardroom.
Stay with me here for a second. Look right past the massive cargo ships and the delivery trucks pulling up to your house, and let's zoom all the way into the smallest room in the whole operation, the corporate boardroom. I mean, who actually controls a company's carbon footprint? Well, it turns out that the way a company organizes its top leaders has a massive, totally measurable impact on how much they pollute, how they treat their workers, and ultimately how they perform financially. It's wild.
Section 1. The Logistics Sustainability Challenge. We're grounding our explainer today in a genuinely fascinating 2025 study. This is by researchers Mert Demir, Bahauddin Mujtaba, and Pelin Vardalier, published in the Organization Development Journal. They looked specifically at the freight and logistics subsector to figure out who is really driving sustainability. Because, instead of just taking broad corporate claims at face value, they wanted to see if specific boardroom setups actually correlated with real, measurable environmental and social outcomes.
And I've got to say, the scale of this research is just impressive. We're talking 62 global supply chain giants across 19 different countries tracked over an 8-year period, from 2016 all the way to 2023. By crunching hundreds of firm-year observations, they were finally able to cut through all the PR noise and spot the real hard trends happening across the globe.
At the very center of all this is a concept called corporate governance. Now, governance isn't just some set of arbitrary rules or dry legal jargon. It's the fundamental design of the people at the table. It's the whole system that balances accountability with value creation. Quite literally, the seating arrangement and the power dynamics of these directors can dictate the amount of pollution released into the air by their fleets. Let that sink in for a second.
Section 2. Inside the boardroom.
Okay, let's dive into this. One of the absolute biggest factors the researchers examined is a concept called CEO duality. Now, this happens when the chief executive officer, the person running the day-to-day operations, also serves as the chairman of the board of directors. And the board is supposed to be the group overseeing the CEO. So think about it this way. CEO duality is basically like letting a student grade their own homework.
There's actually a massive debate in academic circles about this, and it's captured perfectly by two main theories. First, you've got agency theory. This one argues that you absolutely must have independent directors to restrict the CEO and prevent them from acting only in their own short-term interest. But then, on the flip side, stewardship theory takes the exact opposite stance. It argues that giving the CEO total unified power accelerates long-term plans because it just cuts right through the red tape. So what's the verdict? Which one is right when it comes to saving the planet?
Section 3. The ESG Scorecard.
So the researchers mapped out some very specific variables to figure this out. They looked at things like board independence, the percentage of female directors to measure gender diversity, the presence of a dedicated corporate social responsibility or CSR committee, and of course that CEO duality we just talked about. They took all of this and compared it against standardized ESG scores ranging from 0 to 100. They were basically looking for the hard truth, They wanted to separate corporate greenwashing from real, measurable action.
And when we actually look at the math, the results are super clear. Independent boards, they have a strongly positive impact on sustainability. Dedicated CSR committees, highly positive impact. But what about CEO duality? Well, it turns out that having one person hold both of those top jobs has a definitively negative association with ESG performance. Letting the CEO run the board literally hurts a company's sustainability efforts. So, agency theory totally wins out here. Consolidated power just weakens stakeholder-oriented oversight. It's really that simple.
Now, the really crucial point here is the sheer magnitude of these numbers. Check this out. A single structural choice, just establishing a board-level CSR committee, adds a massive 10.2 points to a company's ESG score. No way, right? And on top of that, just increasing the proportion of independent directors by 10% adds roughly another 2 ESG points. So we're not just talking about subtle little shifts here. These are massive leaps in measurable corporate responsibility, and they're born entirely from how a board is built.
Section 4. Profit versus planet.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the nuance of near-term costs, because, there is an elephant in the room. The data shows that a 10-point increase in a company's ESG score is associated with about a 1% drop in return on assets, or ROA, in the short term. And honestly, that makes sense.
In freight and logistics, cleaning up your act, like retrofitting fleets, redesigning entire supply chains, improving labor conditions, that stuff costs real money up front. The financial payoffs for helping the planet, they materialize gradually, not immediately.
But wait, here is where it gets wild. If a company thinks keeping all the power with the CEO will save them money to offset those costs, they are totally wrong. A really surprising fact emerges here. CEO duality doesn't just hurt the planet by lowering ESG scores, it actually hurts short-term profitability too. Companies where the CEO is also the chair saw roughly a 2.9% drop in return on assets. It turns out, combining those roles just exacerbates agency costs and actually undermines profitability. So stewardship theory, completely wrong in this context.
And there's another really fascinating piece to this whole profitability puzzle. The researchers found that board gender diversity consistently boosts return on assets. Now, while the immediate ESG impact of gender diversity kind of varied depending on the individual firm's culture and some specific fixed effects, the financial data is crystal clear. Cultivating diverse boards enhances decision quality, it broadens perspectives, and it absolutely leads to stronger financial performance across the board.
Section 5. The ethical architecture. You know, the study frames this so beautifully. It says that corporate governance operates not only as a performance-enhancing mechanism, but also as an ethical architecture. I love that phrasing, because this isn't just about financial metrics or ticking compliance boxes. This is about how environmental and social burdens, things like emissions, air quality in our neighborhoods, and labor conditions, are handled by the company. The governance structure is literally the ethical framework that decides if a company is going to accept accountability for its impact or just ignore it entirely.
So based on 8 solid years of hard data across 19 countries, the researchers provide this incredibly clear, proven blueprint for governance reform in the logistics industry. Number 1, separate the CEO and chair roles. You have to ensure proper oversight. Number 2, institutionalize board-level CSR committees so you can actually embed sustainability right into the corporate DNA. And number 3, cultivate gender-diverse boards to enhance both decision-making and profitability. Guys, these 3 invisible structural changes, they directly clean up the entire global supply chain. So next time you see a massive cargo ship out in the harbor, or maybe just a delivery van pulling up to your driveway, I want you to remember something. The environmental cost of that package was decided long before it ever shipped. It was decided by the structure of the people sitting at the very top. So, I'm going to leave you with this thought to mull over. Who sits in the invisible boardrooms behind your daily deliveries?